it's good.
Man, why did I say anything?
Ain't nothing.
I always listen to you.
Alright. Now they said no, so I don't know why, but it's none of my biz. Here we go.
Here we go.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of 8 News Now or Nexstar Media Group.
In order to have a big effect, you'd have to have a significant cluster of illnesses here in Southern Nevada.
Tonight on Politics Now, the coronavirus hits Southern Nevada. What we're learning about the patient and the concerns about our tourist-based economy.
Not just about my child, but it's about every child.
An historic lawsuit calls Nevada school funding inadequate and unconstitutional. We take a detailed look at where money for our schools actually comes from.
In this national climate, I'm frankly just a little scared for the future of our country.
Former Secretary of State Ross Miller tells us why he's running for county commission and what his top priorities are.
From 8 News Now, this is Politics Now with Steve Sebelius.
Southern Nevada has one of 2 confirmed cases of coronavirus. Thanks for joining us. I'm Steve Sebelius. We know the Las Vegas patient is a man in his 50s who recently flew to Washington State and Texas.
Right now, we have no indication of community spread. We have not identified any contacts with symptoms. We're in the process of still talking and notifying close contacts and assessing them for symptoms as we speak.
That man is currently in isolation at the VA hospital. The second case is in Washoe County. A man in his 50s was part of an outbreak on a cruise ship. Because that man has family at a Reno elementary school, that school will be closed tomorrow. One concern surrounding the coronavirus is how convention cancellations are affecting our local economy. Sasha Loftus talked to an economist to see what this could mean for our tourism-driven economy.
Let us know if they were to develop any symptoms.
As coronavirus concerns continue across Las Vegas,
it's just going day by day and just hoping that the cancellations stop.
Many in the hospitality industry are feeling the economic effects.
You're depending on these people to come, and then they cancel because they're scared of the coronavirus.
Local companies like Vanilla and Pepper Catering say they've lost a lot of work after several conventions canceled events. Atmosphere 2020, along with the NXT and Global Summits, are just a few that cited coronavirus caution.
For Las Vegas, the effect is largely a demand side effect. So the cancellation of conventions is a precursor of reduction in visitors.
UNLV economics professor Stephen Miller says while these sudden changes aren't a great sign, it's too early to predict any long-term issues.
In order to have a big effect, you'd have to have a significant cluster of illnesses here in Southern Nevada. Such a big cluster that people would decide they're not going to come.
So he says businesses and employees should prepare, but not panic, so they can make it to the other side of any potential downturn.
You're just crossing your fingers and hoping everything's going to get a little bit better.
Nevada Governor Steve Sisolak also adopted an emergency regulation that prevents insurance companies from price gouging for doctor visits, coronavirus tests, or an immunization when that becomes available. Congress passed and President Trump has signed an $8 billion funding package to help battle the novel coronavirus. The National Institutes of Health said there are fewer cases than the seasonal flu, but it has a higher mortality rate. They think it will take a year to come up with a vaccine. Our Washington, D.C. Bureau correspondent Alexandra Limon joins us to tell us what was in that funding package.
$3 billion of it will be dedicated to research and developing a vaccine, as well as researching any other treatment that may be necessary to deal with the coronavirus. Then about $2 billion will pay for lab testing and infection control. The majority of that money, though, is going to be used to reimburse states and cities and counties that are doing the testing. And then there's a lot of other small pots of money that are going to go toward different things like helping any small businesses that might be impacted by the coronavirus, and also establishing a bigger network of telehealth care that's going to be particularly focused towards seniors.
People are worried about their out-of-pocket expenses like co-pays, deductibles, insurance costs to get tested and to be treated for the coronavirus. Is there anything in this bill that would cover those costs or at least help defray those costs?
No, there's nothing specifically in this funding package to help with people's copay or out-of-pocket costs, except for covering the cost of the vaccine, which, as you know, at this point isn't even developed yet. But some of the Democrats here on Capitol Hill especially are worried about that specific issue, that it's going to be low-income Americans who, maybe don't have insurance or don't have great insurance, who are going to be the most impacted by the cost of dealing with an illness if in fact they contract the coronavirus. So we have heard some Democratic lawmakers talking about wanting to continue to work on that issue, maybe being hopeful that they can come up with another bill possibly to help with that, but that is not something that they've dealt with yet.
Well, you can stay updated on our coronavirus coverage on 8 News Now, and you can always get up-to-date information on our website at 8newsnow.com. Well, the filing period for state and local races is now open in Nevada. It's 2 weeks long. Candidates have until March 13th to sign up to run for office. The primary will be held on June 9th, with early voting starting on May 23rd, right around the corner. Next week, we'll break down some of the races and how they're shaping up. Well, one of the most hotly contested of those races will be for the Clark County Commission seat that Larry Brown is giving up due to term limits. We've already interviewed 2 candidates for this race, former Dean of Titus aide Hunter Kane and Las Vegas City Councilman Stavros Anthony. Now we're sitting down with a third, a man who spent 8 years as Nevada's Secretary of State, Ross Miller. Check it out. What issues are important to the county do you think that the commission hasn't been addressing that maybe you would want to take on?
I think, law enforcement needs more resources. As I talk to people that live in my district, which is District C, the northwest part of Las Vegas, I think it's, all around the county, though. Just dealing with smart growth. It's really the issues that you would expect, protecting the community, making sure that we implement the right decisions to deal with this growth that we're experiencing again, which is a tremendous positive thing for the community. We want to make sure that the planning is done appropriately. We want to make sure that the community looks like the type of community that people want to live in. We've seen periods in the county commission's history where they're making the right decisions and periods where it's been embarrassing. We've got to make sure we've got the right leadership here as we head into a really exciting time for Las Vegas.
The coroner works for the county. Should the coroner just be told, look, unless there's a specific statute that says you can keep something confidential, you got to release it?
Yes, clearly. I mean, I would be a champion, absolutely, if I was elected for public records, especially in this day and age. You just absolutely have to give clear transparency to the public at a period where there's so much distrust out there about government. And look, I'm scared for the future of our country. If we don't start behaving appropriately and showing the public that the elected officials are accountable in implementing things like transparency and open records, we have no chance.
Do you agree with that ordinance, and what ought to be done to tackle the homeless problem in Clark County?
I think the better approach, and this is frankly, I think one of the primary reasons that I really want to run for this seat is the people that currently sit on it. I'm just extremely impressed with. This is, the homelessness issue is an issue that Chairwoman Kirkpatrick has taken on, and it's one of her primary issues. That's not a very populist issue. I mean, you can't go out there and campaign that you're going to fix homelessness, I don't think. I mean, and win a ton of elections. It's a tough issue. Yeah. But she's done it the right way. She's brought in all the stakeholders that you would need in order to address this. Dealt with, let's deal with mental health. Where is this factor in? Let's deal with affordable housing. Let's bring workforce training. Let's make sure that we're giving people the resources. Where are these resources in the county being deployed? It does affect people irrespective of which part of the community you live in, even if you're living in the gated communities in the Ivory Towers to more central Las Vegas or North Las Vegas, where you like to see a lot more homelessness. Yeah. But you can't have it sprawl like it is in Los Angeles. That's the lesson that you learn, I think, as you look at other communities, is how they deal with growth, and the communities that deal with it well, take the kind of steps that Chairwoman Kirkpatrick has done.
We can watch that full interview and our interviews with Hunter Kane and Stavros Anthony on 8newsnow.com. Look for 2020 candidate interviews. Up next on Politics Now.
Really, nobody was asking, and they just left the door open for me.
The I-Team's George Knapp explores what the presidential candidates have said about UFOs, and the reporter making sure they get asked the questions. Plus, a historic lawsuit to gain more money for schools, and I take an in-depth look at where the current school money comes from. That's next on Politics Now.
Welcome back to Politics Now.
A parent coalition and local nonprofit Educate Nevada Now sued the state and others this week to improve education funding. The lawsuit claims the Nevada Department of Education, Nevada State Board of Education, and the state are not upholding the constitutional requirement to provide students with an adequate education. 9 parents and their students from Clark County, Washoe County, and White Pine school districts are listed as plaintiffs. This is the first education adequacy lawsuit ever filed in Nevada, but ours was only one of 3 states where someone has not sued, alleging inadequate education funding for K-12 schools. Among the many problems listed, high classroom sizes, a severe teacher shortage, and poor performance by students over the years.
not just about my child, but it's about every child and it's about every grandchild. At some point, we have to grow up as a state. We're not the Wild West anymore.
It's what it takes to get people to notice what's going on and to make sure that these educational needs are met. This, lawsuit could have happened 10 years ago. It needed to.
Well, the attorney for the plaintiffs says the lawsuit is designed to force change. An outcome could take several years. The Nevada State Education Association supports the lawsuit. The Clark County Education Association says it appears to put pressure on legislatures. The CCEA recently filed 2 initiative petitions to increase overall education funding by targeting the gaming tax and the sales tax. Well, the Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities put out a large report breaking down exactly what goes into K-12 education funding in Nevada and where we rank relative to other cities for each one. This chart illustrates that basically 3 big chunks make up almost 90% of what is in the state education fund. This is what's currently known as the Distributive School Account, or DSA, but it's going to be renamed the State Education Fund as the current system gets reworked by a commission. So let's look at these 3 chunks. The vast majority of the K-12 funding comes from the local school support tax, which you pay as a portion of the sales tax. That makes up 39%. The state's general fund contribution is 32%. Property taxes make up 18% of school money. Now, there are 9 other sources that we often hear about and people often argue about, but those altogether only add up to 11% of the state's education funds. That includes things like room tax, which is the biggest chunk, governmental services tax, which you pay as part of your vehicle registration, the retail marijuana tax, the wholesale marijuana tax, and the slot machine tax. Now, if you want to read the whole report, we put a link on our website at 8newsnow.com. Up next, and then there were 2.
They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing.
The Democratic presidential field narrows to Joe Biden versus Bernie Sanders. Now eyes turn to the half-dozen primaries next Tuesday. And George Knapp examines what those candidates are saying about government investigations into UFOs. That's next on Politics Now.
You're watching Politics Now.
President Donald Trump canceled a Southeast Asian summit scheduled for next week, but now he's coming for another event. Trump will speak at the Republican Jewish Coalition meeting on March 14th. Their 2020 leadership meeting will be at the Venetian and the Palazzo from March 13th through the 15th. Former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley is also scheduled to speak at that event. Well, after a big Super Tuesday showing from Joe Biden and a strong second place from Bernie Sanders, the other Democratic candidates started calling it quits. Elizabeth Warren was the last one to drop out on Thursday morning. Her departure leaves the race as a 2-man battle between former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. Warren said sexism played a role in her poor showing.
There are 2 lanes, a progressive lane that Bernie Sanders is the incumbent for and a moderate lane that Joe Biden is the incumbent for. And there's no room for anyone else in this. I thought that wasn't right, but evidently I was wrong.
Both Biden and Sanders have talked with Warren as they seek her endorsement, but she says she needs time to think it over. So far, the other candidates to drop out, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke, have endorsed Biden. The race for delegates continues with 6 states voting next Tuesday. For the second consecutive presidential campaign, candidates for the nation's highest office have had to address an unusual question. What about UFOs? It's largely because of one reporter in a resort town in northern New Hampshire. His name is Damon Steer, and he's been asking what other journalists won't. Are we being visited? The I-Team's George Knapp has that story.
The The road to the White House leads through New Hampshire, home to the nation's first presidential primary. Candidates typically make multiple visits to press the flesh, mingle with voters, and be interviewed by local media, including the Conway Daily Sun, where reporter Damon Steer has made the most of his opportunity to interact with would-be presidents.
Really, nobody was asking, and they just left the door open for me to walk on through.
The IT question is about UFOs. For the most part, Steer covers typical topics for his small-town paper: crime, schools, the county budget. But 4 years ago, he asked candidate Hillary Clinton about UFOs. Clinton said she'd look into it if elected. That response made headlines around the world. As the candidates came to Conway this time around, Steer's editors gave him the green light to ask again, an end-of-the-interview surprise that tests how candidates think on their feet.
In this cycle, we really kind of adopted it as one of our signature questions. Last cycle, they weren't as keen on it as they are now.
Steer admits he has a long-time interest in UFOs, but what cemented the editorial decision for 2020 was the ongoing global news coverage of the now famous Tic Tac UFO encounter, when the U.S. Navy videotaped its interaction with an unknown, highly advanced craft. The fighter pilot who chased the UFO was Black Aces commander Dave Fravor.
David Fravor really gave me an opening to ask about this, because he's a New Hampshire guy and I'm a New Hampshire guy, and we're a UFO state.
Former candidate Andrew Yang told the Daily Sun he's very curious about UFOs and thinks they probably exist. Senator Amy Klobuchar initially said she didn't know much about the Tic Tac, but would read up on it, and she did. When asked a second time by Steer, Klobuchar was ready.
I think we don't know enough. I don't know. I don't know what's happened, not just with that sighting, but with others. And I think one of the things a president could do is to look into what's there in terms of what does the science say, what does our military say.
Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard told the paper it wasn't a topic she'd spent time on, but Mayor Pete Buttigieg gave a cerebral response.
As a curious species, always be looking at what's going on around us. Unimaginably strange things often happen in the grand sweep of American and world history, and we should never fail to be on the lookout for what's happening around us.
Governor Deval Patrick, who sits on the board of a major airline, told Steer he's had reports from airline pilots about strange things they've seen in the skies. Senator Michael Bennet gave what may be the most intriguing answer.
He said you have to be extremely careful because of his role on the Intelligence Committee. And then he said, I'm not talking about anything I know from the Intelligence Committee, but I'll tell you that our military are seeing some strange stuff. And he doesn't know what it is. They don't know what it is.
The first time Steer asked Bernie Sanders about UFOs, he received a terse response. This time around, Sanders had already been asked about UFOs by podcaster Joe Rogan, so Steer took a different angle.
I was just wondering if you think they might have the key to some green technology or something to help.
Let's not jump the gun. My wife would never forgive me if I did not.
Steer says he intends to continue his pursuit of the UFO story because of its potential significance and hopes other journalists do the same.
My readers put up with it, and I'm happy they do.
George Knapp, 8 News Now.
Steer says he hasn't been able to pose the question to Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren. He's still hoping other reporters will do it if or when they get the chance. For more information, we're putting additional links to the candidate interviews on our website and on MysteryWire.com. Well, Democrats said they registered about 17,000 new voters for the Nevada caucus, but the Secretary of State's office said overall the number of active registered voters in February went down. That's because of routine voter list maintenance that was done by the Clark County Registrar of Voters. Nevada's Secretary of State actually says there was a decrease of more than 7,300 voters statewide. Nevada has just under 1.6 million registered voters. More than 611,000 of those are Democrats, 524,000 are Republicans, and about 360,000 people registered as nonpartisan. Well, will there be a round two? What happened in the Lincoln County Commission as they debated holding another alien stock Storm Area 51 festival this year? That's next on Politics Now.
watching Politics Now.
President Donald Trump's ban on bump stocks will stay in place. Supreme Court justices rejected a challenge to the ban brought on by gun rights advocates. The devices allow semi-automatic firearms to quickly fire off rounds. Trump pushed for the ban after 1 October, where the shooter used bump stocks. The government estimates hundreds of thousands of the bump stocks have been sold. However, the ban requires owners to either destroy them or surrender them. We asked the U.S. Attorney's Office in Nevada, and they told us so far nobody in Nevada has been charged with possession of one of the bump stocks since the ban kicked in. Well, the Lincoln County Commission took up the possibility of a 2020 edition of last year's Storm Area 51 event. This is video of last year's event, which was held in September. Some residents in Rachel attended the meeting and voiced their opposition. The county commissioner said they want to hear from promoters before ruling out any of the musical events. Last year, the county spent around $250,000 covering all the costs associated with the event, which was called Alien Stock. George Harris, who owns the Alien Research Center in Hico, says he doesn't want to have an event this year. Says he does want to have an event this year. 3,000 people attended last year's events in September. Well, here's what we are going to be watching next week. President Donald Trump will be back in Las Vegas on Thursday. Other top Republican leaders will be speaking at